The courtroom of Greenville County Hall buzzed with murmurs as curious onlookers filled the seats, their gazes flitting between the stern-faced judge and a young man standing awkwardly at the defendant's table. The room's walls, steeped in the echoes of countless verdicts, seemed to bear down on the 19-year-old who appeared woefully out of place. Elliot Grant, slim and unassuming, stood with slouched shoulders, his oversized jacket and scuffed sneakers doing little to command respect. Clutched in his hands were a few crumpled sheets of paper, their edges worn from anxious handling. Seated at the bench was Judge Carol Mason, known for her sharp tongue and zero tolerance for nonsense. Her reputation for running a strict courtroom preceded her, and her eyes bore into Elliot with a look of skepticism mixed with mild irritation. "Mr. Grant," she began, her tone crisp and clipped, "this court does not look kindly on individuals who come here unprepared. Do you understand?" Elliot's throat tightened, but he managed a faint nod. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand." A ripple of soft laughter from the gallery followed his words, only to be met with Judge Mason's icy glare. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Very well," she said, folding her arms. "Proceed. Let's see what you've got." The case seemed like an open-and-shut situation, a minor traffic violation over a speeding ticket. To the spectators, Elliot looked every bit the naive young man who had wandered into the wrong room, hopelessly outmatched. What they didn't know, however, was that beneath his timid demeanor lay a mind sharp enough to dismantle every assumption in the room. Taking a deep breath, Elliot straightened slightly, gripping the edges of his papers until they stopped shaking. The faint shuffle of his sneakers echoed through the courtroom as he stepped forward. "And Madam Judge," he stammered at first, his voice catching slightly. The judge arched an eyebrow, her impatience evident. "If you're not ready, Mr. Grant, I'll dismiss this case without further delay." A hushed chuckle rippled through the gallery. Elliot, swallowing hard, adjusted his stance and steadied his voice. "I'm ready, Your Honor." "Then get on with it," Judge Mason replied, motioning for him to proceed. Her demeanor conveyed that she had already decided this was a waste of time. Elliot began recounting the events of the day he was pulled over, his words halting but meticulous. Rather than offering a generic excuse, he delivered a detailed narrative of the road conditions, weather, and even the officer's exact position when the radar reading was taken. As his account unfolded, the mood in the room began to shift from dismissal to intrigue. Judge Mason tapped her pen against the desk, slowing her movements as her interest peaked. Elliot, sensing the room's attention shifting, drew in a steadying breath and continued. "According to subsection 412.6b of the State Traffic Code," he said, his voice firmer now, "the equipment used to determine my speed must meet specific conditions, including periodic calibration. Without that, the radar reading is not admissible as evidence." He glanced at the prosecutor, whose confident smirk had faltered ever so slightly. The judge narrowed her eyes, her pen momentarily still. "You're citing statute now, Mr. Grant?" she asked with a hint of disbelief. "Yes, Your Honor," Elliot replied, holding up his papers. "If I may, I've also prepared a diagram to illustrate the officer's vantage point and the conditions that may have affected the radar's accuracy." He unfolded a simple, hand-drawn sketch, stepping closer to the evidence table. Though lacking in artistic flair, the diagram was precise, every angle and distance meticulously marked. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder as spectators leaned forward, craning their necks to catch a glimpse. Judge Mason glanced at the diagram, her expression unreadable. Before she could speak, the prosecutor interjected. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The statute he's referencing has no bearing on this case." Elliot, calm but determined, turned to address the challenge. "With all respect, it is relevant. The statute clearly states that radar equipment must be calibrated and documented for readings to hold legal validity. Without proof of calibration, the evidence against me is inadmissible." The judge leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowing slightly as she regarded the prosecutor. The murmurs in the courtroom fell silent as all eyes returned to Elliot. Judge Mason folded her hands and asked, "And where exactly did you come across this information, Mr. Grant?" Elliot hesitated briefly, then met her gaze. "I've been studying legal cases for years, Your Honor. I've always had an interest in understanding the law." The prosecutor adjusted his tie, visibly unsettled. "Your Honor, this is an attempt to muddy the waters with irrelevant technicalities." But Elliot didn't flinch. "Respectfully, Your Honor, the law is built on technicalities. If we don't follow them, we undermine the fairness of the system itself." His words carried a confidence that felt out of place for someone his age, yet they resonated deeply in the room. The courtroom, which had been restless moments before, now hung on his every word. The skeptical smiles that had greeted him when he walked in had disappeared entirely. Elliot lifted his papers and said, "I prepared a motion to dismiss the charges based on procedural flaws. The law isn't about technicalities. It's about truth, evidence, and fairness." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Mason skimmed through the motion, her expression hard to read. Adjusting her glasses, she finally said, "This is remarkably well prepared, Mr. Grant. Far beyond what I'd expect from most early attorneys." The gallery murmured in surprise before the judge silenced them with a rap of her gavel. Turning to the prosecutor, she asked, "Counselor, do you have a rebuttals?" The attorney hesitated, then admitted, "No, Your Honor. The defense has made a compelling argument." Judge Mason's sharp demeanor softened as she addressed Elliot. "Mr. Grant, I misjudged you. You've demonstrated a remarkable understanding of the law and reminded us all of its true purpose. Based on your motion, I grant the dismissal." The sound of her gavel was followed by silence, then applause as the gallery erupted in admiration. Elliot stood still, his face a mix of relief and disbelief, as the judge stepped down from the bench. As she passed him, she paused and extended her hand. "You have a bright future ahead, Mr. Grant. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Elliot shook her hand firmly. "Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot." When Elliot left the courtroom, he was greeted by reporters and flashing cameras. "Elliot Grant, is it true you've been studying law since you were a teenager?" one asked. "How did you prepare for this case?" another chimed in. Elliot raised his hand for quiet, a small smile on his face. "I only did what anyone would have done, stood up for myself. I believed in fairness, and I'm grateful that's what I received." By the end of the day, clips of his defense had gone viral, sparking national conversations. People marveled at his brilliance, while others criticized the initial bias against him. Elliot's story became a symbol of resilience and potential. At home, Elliot's mother, Sarah, watched the coverage with pride. When he walked through the door, she hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she said. "Thanks, Mom," Elliot replied, his voice soft but firm. "I just wanted to stand up for myself." Though Elliot's story brought praise and new opportunities, it also sparked challenges. Law firms offered him internships, advocacy groups celebrated him, and critics debated his success. Meanwhile, Judge Mason reflected on her own bias. "Elliot Grant taught me an invaluable lesson," she said in an interview. "Justice must rise above assumptions." What started as a simple speeding ticket grew into a larger conversation about persistence, bias, and challenging expectations. For Elliot, the victory wasn't about fame. It was proof that determination and preparation could open any door.